The first thing the soldiers noticed was the silence. No voices, no footsteps, not even the sound of the wind brushing through the tall grass that lined the road into Hoer Verde. The village sat beneath a burning white sun, still and ghostly. Chickens wandered loose in the dirt, their wings hanging low, but no one came to gather them. The houses, 30 or so, all made of pale mud bricks and tin roofs, stood open, doors yawning into the quiet. Sergeant Daniel Miller raised his rifle slightly as he stepped off the truck. "Where is everybody?" he whispered. His partner, Corporal Harris, didn't answer. He just stared down the narrow main street where a child's bicycle had fallen on its side. Its back wheel spun slowly, clicking each time it made a full turn. They walked toward the center of town. Halfway down the street, they stopped in front of a wooden table covered with half-eaten food. Plates still steamed faintly under the sunlight. Cups of coffee had cooled beside unfinished bread. It looked like breakfast had just been interrupted. Miller called out in English, his voice trembling slightly. "Hello? Anyone here?" Only the sound of a single radio replied, crackling softly from inside a nearby house. The voice on the radio was calm, cheerful, and terribly out of place. It was a song, an upbeat melody, playing as if life in Hoer Verde had never stopped. When the men entered the house, the air inside was thick, warm, and stale. A family of 4 had clearly lived there. 2 beds, a table with 2 child-sized cups, and a small blackboard leaning against the wall. On the blackboard, written in shaky white chalk, were 3 words. "There is no salvation." Harris swallowed hard. "Do you think this is a joke?" Miller didn't answer. He touched the writing gently with his gloved hand. The chalk smeared. "It's fresh," he said. "Whoever wrote this wasn't gone long. As the facts..." I stepped back outside. Something else caught Miller's attention. At the far end of the village, near the church, a faint hum filled the air. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded low and almost human, like a group humming a tune just below hearing level. The men turned their heads in unison. "Do you hear that?" Miller asked. Harris nodded slowly. "Yeah, from the church." The soldiers began walking toward it, each step crunching against the dusty earth. The closer they got, the clearer the hum became. It was rhythmic. 3 tones, then a pause. 3 tones, then silence. When they reached the church doors, the hum stopped. Miller pushed the heavy wooden doors open. Inside, the air was thick and dry. The pews were perfectly arranged, candles still flickering on the altar. Dozens of Bibles lay open as if dropped mid-service. And on the floor before the altar, in a perfect circle, were hundreds of dead crows. Their feathers formed a black ring around a single object at the center, a small wooden cross standing upright in a bowl of grain. No human bodies, no footprints. Just the crows, the cross, and the smell of something rotten beneath the floorboards. Miller backed away, whispering, "This isn't right." The men turned to leave, but as they stepped outside, they saw something that froze them completely. At the edge of the village, all the trees were bent in one direction, as if a powerful wind had swept through, but the grass beneath them was untouched. And along the dirt path leading away from the church, they could see hundreds of bare footprints, tiny and uneven, leading straight into the forest. All children's footprints. And that was when the humming started again, louder this time, coming from the woods. Miller and Harris stared at each other. "We have to go back to the truck," Harris said. But Miller didn't move. His eyes were locked on something glimmering where, the tree line. A small figure stood there, just visible through the haze, a child, motionless, pale as chalk, staring back at them. When Miller blinked, the child was gone. The humming stopped. Only the silence returned. 2 days earlier, the village had been alive. Morning sunlight poured through the windows of Mary Collins's farmhouse, warming the kitchen table. Mary was the school teacher, the only one for miles. Her husband Peter was a farmer who grew sugarcane and cassava. Their 2 children, Lily and Andrew, chased each other outside, their laughter echoing across the fields. That day had started like any other. Peter sharpened his tools. The neighbors, the Ortega family, walked down the road carrying baskets of fresh corn. The local priest, Father Alvarez, passed by on his bicycle, calling out good morning. The radio played a samba tune in every home. Everything was ordinary, until the sky changed. Around noon, the clouds rolled in fast and low, darker than thunder. Farmers stopped working as the wind began to smell of burnt metal. One of the children pointed upwards, saying the sky looked like a bruise. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a hum, rising from the fields. Peter thought it was the generator at the grain mill. But when he turned off his tractor, the noise was still there. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the soil, the air, even the corn. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the hum through the open window. By morning, the village dogs were gone. By afternoon, the well water had turned a strange, cloudy green. The priest called a meeting in the church. "It's a test," he said, his voice shaking. "We must pray. Do not leave the village. Do not go into the fields tonight." But not everyone listened. That evening, Peter and 2 others went to check their crops. What they found made them run back home in terror. The sugarcane had split open at the roots. Inside, instead of clean white stalks, there were dark pulsing veins, like something alive growing inside the plants. By dawn, no one had slept. The humming had grown louder, pulsing through the walls. Birds fell from the sky, the cows refused to move. People began packing bags to leave. But when they stepped outside, they said the air felt heavy, too thick to breathe. Mary clutched her children, whispering prayers as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell rang by itself. And then everything went quiet. The humming stopped. The world held its breath. Mary looked out her window. The sky had turned pale grey and the village was empty. The neighbours' doors were open, the streets were bare. "Peter?" she called out. No answer. She took her children's hands and stepped outside. The stillness felt wrong, like the air itself was watching. As she neared the church, she saw something scrawled on the wooden wall in white chalk. "There is no salvation." Before she could turn away, she heard the hum again, this time coming from behind her. When she spun around, her children were gone. She screamed their names into the empty air, but the sound was swallowed whole. Then slowly the church doors creaked open. Inside, dozens of voices began whispering in unison. She stepped closer. The whispers grew louder until they became words. "Join the harvest." And then, silence. 2 days later, the soldiers found her house. Her children's beds were empty. A half-eaten meal sat cold on the table. The blackboard message still glowed faintly under the sunlight, as if written only moments before. Miller stared at it again. "There is no salvation." He turned toward the forest. The humming had returned, soft, steady, pulling him toward the trees. Harris grabbed his arm. "Don't," he said. "We're leaving, now." But Miller didn't move. He was staring at something new. The soil at his feet was shifting, slowly, like breath moving beneath the earth. A small handpan, rint pressed up through the dirt. Then another, and another. Harris backed away, shouting, "Run!" But Miller stood frozen as the ground beneath him began to rise. The last thing he saw, before everything went black, was the tiny, pale face of a child pushing up from the soil, smiling faintly as the humming swelled all around. And then, nothing. When rescue teams arrived the next morning, they found the soldiers' truck empty, its engines still running. The radio was playing softly. No one ever saw the Miller or Harris again. And deep in the forest, where the children's footprints ended, the trees were covered with white chalk markings. All of them read the same thing. There is no salvation. The news broke 3 weeks later. Every major paper in South America carried the same headline. An entire village vanishes. No survivors found in Hoer Verde. Radio broadcasters called it a miracle. Others called it a curse. The Brazilian army denied involvement. Yet they were the first to seal off the site. No one was allowed within 20 miles of the village. And still the rumors spread. American journalist Eleanor Grant was sitting in a cafe in Sao Paulo when she heard the story for the first time. She was 34, sharp-eyed and known for chasing stories no one else dared to touch. Her editor warned her that this one wasn't worth the trip. A ghost story in the jungle, he called it. But when she read the survivor accounts, 2 soldiers who'd radioed in strange noises before disappearing, she packed her camera and boarded a train heading north. The ride to the countryside took nearly 2 days. The closer Eleanor got, the more nervous people became. Locals refused to speak the village's name. One man, an old farmer, only muttered, "That place, it's been claimed." When she asked by whom, he crossed himself and said, "By the harvest." When she finally reached the military checkpoint outside Hoer Verde, soldiers stood in the heat with their rifles slung low. Their uniforms were streaked with dust. The air carried a faint, metallic smell. "Press," she said, flashing her credentials. The officer in charge, Captain Duarte, gave her a tired look. "You're wasting your time, miss. There's nothing to see in there." Eleanor smiled politely. "If there's nothing to see, you won't mind if I take a look?" Duarte sighed. "Suit yourself, but don't stay after sunset." He handed her a face mask. "Air's strange there," he said quietly. "Don't breathe too deep." Eleanor walked into the village just as the sun began to lower, painting the world gold. At first glance, it looked like any abandoned settlement. Houses half collapsed, weeds growing through cobblestone paths. Doors swinging gently in the wind. But the silence was wrong. Even the insects refused to sing. She stopped by a house with a table still set for breakfast. Dust covered the plates. A coffee pot sat half full. The food hadn't rotted. It had hardened, petrified, as if frozen in time. When she touched it, it didn't crumble. It rang faintly, like metal. Her camera clicked. Each flash echoed too loudly. Inside the next house, she found a toy, a small wooden train. When she picked it up, she heard a faint hum beneath the floorboards. It grew louder the longer she held the toy. She dropped it. The sound stopped. She moved onto the church. The doors creaked open just enough for her to peek inside. The pews were empty. The cross stood in perfect alignment with the afternoon sun. And there, scrawled across the altar in new chalk, were the words again, "There is no salvation." Her breath quickened. "Someone's been here recently," she whispered into her recorder. "The message looks fresh." The recorder hissed, then replayed her voice back with a strange echo. Only it wasn't her voice that said the words. It was a child's. She froze. The recorder clicked off by itself. Outside, the wind began to stir. Dust spiraled up from the jitters. Round. The sound of the hum returned, faint but growing, like a swarm beneath the earth. Eleanor grabbed her equipment and ran toward the street. She didn't see the figure watching her from the church doorway. A small child, barefoot, face pale as chalk. That night, Eleanor stayed at a small outpost on the edge of the forest. The soldiers there were restless. One young private told her, "We hear them at night. Voices in the trees. Sometimes children laugh. Sometimes they call our names." "Whose names?" she asked. He swallowed. "The ones who disappeared. Miller. Aris?" Eleanor turned on her tape recorder again. "What do they say?" He stared at the floor. "They say, join us in the harvest." She switched off the recorder, forcing a smile. "It's just the jungle playing tricks on you." But later that night, as she lay in her cot, she heard it too, a low rhythmic hum rising from the distance. It pulsed through the ground, in time with her heartbeat. By morning, 2 soldiers were missing. Their beds were empty. Their boots were still at the door. Captain Duarte ordered everyone to pack up. "We're leaving this site before it takes more of us," he said. Eleanor refused. "This is a story the world needs to know." Duarte leaned close. "Then tell it from far away." He left her at the checkpoint and drove off with the rest of his unit. Eleanor spent the next 3 days investigating alone. She mapped every house, collected soil samples, and documented the strange lack of decay. Even the dead vegetation looked preserved, like glass. The The soil itself shimmered faintly under her flashlight, almost metallic. When she brought her hand close to the ground, her compass needle began to spin. That night, she set up her tent near the edge of the forest. The humming started again at 2:17 a.m. She wrote in her notes, "The sound grows stronger when I approach the tree line. Feels almost magnetic." Then she noticed movement. Faint shadows weaving between the trees. Small, fast shapes. Children, she thought, she twittered. Round on her flashlight. Nothing. Only dust swirling in the air. But when she turned around, the word salvation had been written on her tent in chalk. Fresh, wet. Her hands shook. She grabbed her camera, snapped photos of the markings, and stepped backward, right into someone. She spun around. No one was there. Only her own footprints. She whispered, "Who's there?" The forest answered with laughter. Faint overlapping voices that sounded like children playing hide and seek. Her flashlight flickered. In the beam, she saw dozens of handprints appear on the trees around her, all glowing pale white. They began to pulse with the hum. She ran. When she finally stumbled back into the open field, the sound stopped. She fell to her knees, breathing hard. Her recorder was still on. When she played it back, there was a voice. Clear, quiet, and impossibly close. It said, "You shouldn't have come." 2 days later, a rescue helicopter spotted Eleanor's camp. The tent was still standing. Her notes and camera were neatly packed, but she was gone. Authorities recovered only one reel of film. The final shots she'd taken. When developed, the images showed something chilling. The first few frames captured the empty houses, the petrified food, the church interior. But in the last photograph, taken at night, the camera pointed toward the fields. The picture showed hundreds of figures standing among the crops. Small, child-sized silhouettes lined up in perfect rows facing the lens. Their eyes reflected the flash like mirrors. The lab technician who processed the film resigned the next day, claiming the negatives moved when he tried to scan them. The government sealed the case under the title Operation Verde, labeling it unexplained environmental contamination. But locals still whispered about it for decades. They said the land itself was alive, that the soil of Hoer Verde demanded a harvest every generation. 30 years later, in 1985, the site was reopened for research. A team of geologists and historians arrived, led by Dr. Richard Moore from the University of Michigan. He'd read Eleanor Grant's unpublished report and wanted to finish her work. "We're here to study the magnetic anomalies," he told the press. "Not chase ghosts." But the first night in the village, the humming began again. Moore recorded it on his equipment. A deep vibration, too low for human hearing, but strong enough to register on seismic sensors. The frequency pulsed at intervals, almost like a heartbeat. His assistant Karen noticed that each pulse caused her compass to twist toward the church. When they entered the church, they found a new message written on the wall in glowing dust. "Welcome back, Eleanor." Karen turned to Moore. "Who's Eleanor?" He stared at the message, his face pale. "The last reporter who came here?" She frowned. "But that was 30 years ago." He nodded slowly. "Exactly." That night the humming stopped. The air went still. And from deep beneath the soil, something began to move. The ground trembled softly, like a breath exhaling. Moore grabbed his flashlight and looked toward the fields. In the distance, he saw faint, shifting shapes rising from the crops. Dozens of them. Children. They stood perfectly still, faces pale, eyes reflecting the moonlight. Karen whispered, "Dr. Moore, are they?" The radio crackled. A child's voice came through, echoing through every speaker in camp. "There is no salvation." The lights went out. When morning came, the equipment lay scattered and the field was empty again. Only one thing remained. A chalk message on the side of the tent. "Join us in the harvest." And beneath it, a single small handprint pressed into the soil.